The way that we wrote this book was we broke it up so that I wrote the parts on the interviews with the people, the actual stories, and then Robert wrote the introductions to the sections. So that's how we did that. So I'm going to be reading a couple passages from a few stories. And the first one that I want to take is from the one called Sarah and Josie, which is the two neighbors that were both affected about the same time, about 5 years ago, when drilling started out there. One of the neighbors lost her water pretty much. The quantity dropped to just about nothing after drilling started. The other neighbor, her quality of her water started to degrade, where she started to see black sediment and smells. And at the same time as all this was happening, their animals were getting sick, and their children were starting to get sick. So what's happening right now with those cases is they are hoping near the end of litigation, a very big lawsuit. One of them has left that area on the advice of her doctor and because her children were so ill. The other person is sticking it out there because of all of her horses. She has quite a few horses, and she just has no place to go with her horses and dogs, and she breeds. So that's the setting of this. And then the only other thing I want to add is for all of these stories, for me as an interviewer, the big question that I always had is, why did you lease? Especially for people like this who really understood the situation, were very intelligent and knew about a lot of the problems. So that was a question. That was a question I always wanted to ask up front, but I didn't. I always held it back until I met with the people and felt like I had developed a rapport and some trust, because I didn't want to turn people off to further questions. So I really held that one until last, because I just really wanted to feel like I wasn't putting them on the spot. So that's the setting of where I'm going to start reading about this person who actually did end up moving away. So again, I'm asking her, why did you do this? And here's what she says. She says, I was afraid of losing my water because we've always had to haul our own water. She pointed across the street from where we sat in the rental house to her parents' home, where there was no water well, and until very recently, no municipal water, where she'd helped to haul water ever since she could remember. That farmhouse was the first place I ever lived in that had water. We had an abundant supply of water. We could wash dishes, take showers, wash our vehicles, do laundry, and never had to worry about running out of water. The water was so good and so plentiful, Sarah said, that she shared it with her parents and her church. Ironically, Sarah, Josie, and another neighbor had all heard about water contamination associated with unconventional gas drilling before signing no-drill leases, which is no surface drilling or drill sites permitted on the leased premises, in 2007. So they actually signed 2 years before drilling ever started there. But they decided to lease as a group and protect themselves with an added clause guaranteeing that if there were any problems with their water supply, the gas drilling company would supply them with water. And then Sarah said, and thank God we added that clause, because people around us that didn't do that, they've had a really hard time obtaining water. But it didn't help us with the air. We had no idea about that part. So what actually happened here with the water with both Sarah and Josie is that they never got drinking water. They got a water buffalo. And I think when I first heard about water buffaloes, you always think, okay, that's for all water purposes, but really people don't drink that. I think they see it. It comes in this huge, how many gallons, Robert? Like 2,000 gallons or something like that, a huge plastic container. They see black sediment at the bottom. It's not washed out. They probably just dump municipal water in. The drilling company, we're not really sure. But people don't really drink this water. So in both cases, they've had to buy their own drinking water. So that's even though they had the clause in here. And at one point, if you read this chapter, you'll learn that the drilling company, along with the regulatory agency, which in this case was the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, decided that the water was just fine, that by testing methods, they could not prove that the drilling company contaminated their water. So they wrote and told them, we are going to take your water source away. We are no longer going to supply you with water. So that happened even though they had the clause. So the clause doesn't really protect them. It just gives them maybe a little bit of an in to petition the Department of Environmental Protection to say, hey, legally, if we push you, we've got a lawyer, we can push and we can get, we're going to try and get some water from the drilling company. So that's that one. The other one I wanted to read from is back in the environmental justice section. This story comes from a case from a community in Pennsylvania where the community itself is really segregated from the rest of the town in services, in the roads, for many different reasons. This is a little community. It started out, from the history of this, it started out as a little hunting community where people who came to hunt in that part of Pennsylvania had cabins, and then it developed into this community where a lot of really poor people live. So what happened here was they were surrounded by lots of shale gas wells in this area, and their well water was very much affected. The quality of their water, they became ill, the people were becoming ill, and their animals were becoming ill. So what happened is the woman of the story, this is Claire and Jason, she decided to start a water drive. And there are water drives all over the country in areas where fracking is occurring to try to get others to help pay for bottled water and just gallons of jugged water so these people can drink good water. So I asked her, how did you have the time to do this? Because she was really sick and she was taking care of her husband and other community members. I asked her how she could find the time and what was her motivation. And so she gave me a really great answer. So this is just a few paragraphs. I'll read this. So by March 2012, the drilling company removed all the water buffaloes from the Wassermans' neighbors, forcing the small, quiet community to ask for help. Claire led the water drive with the assistance of local churches and organizations, even though she was being treated for leukemia, seizures, and renal failure. When I asked how she managed this, she replied, "Somebody has to. They are hurting as much as I am." By late 2013, 36 families were receiving water donations. When the drive began in March 2012, only 12 families were receiving water. I recalled an update from Claire in June 2012. At that time, a neighbor had become very ill after drinking her well water. Claire brought her bottled water and said that the woman was feeling better within 24 hours. But there is another motivation for Claire. I'm becoming bitter because they, the drilling company, did this to my community, and how dare they? My community, if someone dies, we gather food or clothing or vouchers. Fire, we do the same thing. That's our community. But how dare they do this to us? How dare they cut off our water? Claire had remained calm throughout our discussion, but now was outraged. I was getting very angry, very bitter, and I channeled myself into this water problem. A lot of people have asked me, why do you do it, and how can you do it? You know, you're living without water yourself. I tell them, I wake up every morning thinking about water. From my coffee in the morning until sleep at night, every waking second of my day is consumed by water. But 2 hours a day, when I leave my house, bringing water to my neighbors and listening to what they have to say, it is so therapeutic. So that was another thing that surprised me about this woman. It was that she felt like she had to get out of her house. Her little trailer was stacked high on all parts with bottled water. And if you read this chapter, I said, well, why do you sort of have the water separated? And she said, well, that's for babies, that's for people with kidney failure. There was all kinds of special water that she had for the community. So they're really thinking of, they're almost like a little hospital. They're providing of certain kinds of water for different people. And this was all organized by the neighbors and by the community, and then helped by with the church. And these are actually, looked into this, are really happening all over the country. So
they absorb toxins through their skin when they shower with add water?
They do, but they have a camp shower. But another part of it that was really amazing was as we walked up to the house, she had a front porch and a back porch. And she had, again, jugs all over the place. And she said, now these jugs are for washing my dishes, but those jugs over there in the sun, they're for our showers. So they take that jug of water and they'd put that in their little camp shower, and they'd get a few, how much of a jug for that shower for that day. And they were using some obscenely small amount of water a day per person, like 2.5 gallons. Whereas the Red Cross, and I have that in here, it's like more than that. For it's, you've got to have more than that if you're going to drink, for all your usages, everything with water, washing clothes, bathing, everything. Yeah, but thanks for asking that question. When she said that we use the sun to warm our water, I thought, wow, that's great. You're thinking ahead. Everything you do, you have to think in advance with water use. So I'm going to let Robert talk now.
I can't be as interesting as Michelle, so you'll just have to put up with that. I'm sorry. It's the way it goes. But anyway, I just want to tell you a little bit about, how we think about the problems that we've seen. We've seen so many horrendous issues, but, at the same time, we're always told how safe the process is and that sort of thing. So I want to talk a little bit about how we've tried to frame that. And I'll read little bits and pieces from the book, but I'll probably end up paraphrasing it mostly. Anyway, this one passage is how we think about it. The potential threat to our community is just a small part of a worldwide debate that has as its core the values and essence of modern life. That is, we require energy to live in the modern world, but what degree of risk and environmental degradation is acceptable to obtain that energy? Who should be asked to sacrifice and who should profit? So, there are two aspects of that. It's like, how do we set the degree of risk? How do we understand that? Because we're told that, everything that we've ever talked about is just, rare anecdotal information. It's not very important, but everybody else is so happy that this is being done. So we need to start thinking about really, how do we think about the risk? And actually, let me just as an aside say, I thought Michelle was going to talk about this, but each one of these stories, the people are actually, they're actually pseudonyms. Everything in there is real. We have it all backed up with hours of video, etc. It's all real, but there's pseudonyms. But there are a couple of reasons why it's pseudonyms. One is because, about half the people didn't want their names used, so we just made the decision we won't use anybody's name. But more importantly, I think you got to think of them as sort of symbols for a lot of other people. I don't know how many, hundreds, thousands of other people who've gone through the same thing. So these are just examples of what we've seen. We've seen a lot of other people with exactly the same stories. So the main point is, these aren't the only stories out there. They were ones that we thought were compelling and we tried to talk about. So anyway, thinking about risk, one of the things we hear a lot about in Ithaca in particular is the precautionary principle. People talk about that a lot. And so we invoke that. It states that if an action is suspected of causing harm, then the burden of proof is on the entity that causes that harm or that takes the action that may cause the harm. In the case of the fossil fuel industry, the precautionary principle would suggest that the industry has the obligation to prove that its actions do not cause harm. But on the other hand, their point of view is really more like the tobacco industry. That is, they say, if a link between drilling operations and a health impact can't be proven definitively, then really the link has to be rejected and any burden of proof is on the person that's harmed, the victim. So that's sort of two competing ideas. And to make matters worse, there's a well, I don't know if it makes matters worse or clarifies it, but there's a really well-known legal scholar from the University of Chicago named Cass Sunstein who wrote a book called Laws of Fear. And his point of view is that the precautionary principle is actually incoherent, that you might take an action and that may have a risk, but there may also be a risk of not taking that action. So what do? You can't figure it out. So our argument in the book and our argument all along is we have to be a little bit more nuanced. We can't really say, precautionary principle, the strictest interpretation of the precautionary principle is correct. We have to figure out how to balance the issues. And one of the examples that I use in the book and I've talked about a lot is what I think one way to look at it is more like drug approvals in this country. We don't really tell a drug manufacturer to, oh yeah, send the drug out, see how many people die, see if it works, And if they could prove that they're dying because of your drug, then you got to pull it off the market. We don't say that, do we? I mean, that's sort of what the industry is doing here. What we do instead is make the drug industry go through a very rigorous set of trials, phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. And through that, they have certain milestones that they have to reach in order to show that a drug is safe and effective. And I think that's the kind of model that we really need to have here in order to get somewhere. Okay, so the people that we talked about in these stories are all suffering harm. And there's this metaphor of the sacrificial lamb. And I mean, it's not something that I came up with or Michelle came up with, but it's something that actually it's sort of ironic, but the first time I ever really thought about it in terms of this process was something that Terry Engelder said, who's the guy who is the father of the Marcellus Shale. It was his idea to tap the Marcellus Shale. And he started talking at one conference, I think it was in New York City, where he mentioned that, well, there are going to be some problems and people are going to have to sacrifice in order to get this right. And I thought that was a really curious statement, that people have to sacrifice so the industry will get it right. But at the same time, we always hear, we've been doing this for 60 years and there's never been one instance of a problem. So what about these people that are asked to sacrifice? They're sort of like sacrificial lambs. And that led us to this is sort of the end of the chapter of the first family that Michelle was talking about, and I'll just read this paragraph. Many proponents of gas drilling consider families such as these sacrificial lambs. They have lost their way of life so that the rest of us can continue to enjoy ours. We purchase our 100,000 BTU barbecue grills from Home Depot and grill our grass-fed organic steaks. We can heat our poorly insulated houses to 75 degrees in the dead of winter so we can walk naked from the bed to the bathroom in the middle of the night. The people are told that they're being patriotic, supplying the energy needs of our country so that we do not have to import oil from the Middle East. At the same time, these multinational corporations are purchasing leases in Pennsylvania and making plans to ship the gas to China and other lucrative markets. In most cultures, lambs that are sacrificed are treated with some respect, objects of reverence before the ultimate deed. Our sacrificial lambs are objects of derision that are cast aside and made to beg for water. Now, actually, that was the way we wrote the paragraph. Actually, Beacon edited it, so it doesn't show up. They didn't like the stuff about the naked stuff or the organic steaks. But anyway, the point of all is we have people we talk about in this book. We have a lot of people that we know that are impacted. What we don't know yet for sure is how many people are impacted. We don't know for sure the prevalence of this. We don't have good links between that we can convince everybody that drilling impacted these people. We have really good cases, but in every case we don't have definitive proof. And that's the kind of thing we'd like to move forward with and get better proof. So the other motivation in writing this book, at least for me, Michelle as well, is that we can't always say no. We can't always say, let's just stop this. We have to, we're living. We have lights in here. We have to do something about it. And that's why I think our community is great about that. I mean, Solar Tompkins, et cetera. We're trying to move beyond that. That's what we write about a lot in the last part of the book. And one of the things that really, really bothers me, and I talk about it in there, is that we hear all the time that alternative energies can only survive because they're subsidized. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to do was really look into that and see how true that was. And it's really surprising what you find out. The International Monetary Fund made a calculation. In 2011, they estimated the subsidies that went to the oil and gas companies, just 1 year, worldwide. And they included not only the direct subsidies, giving them money, giving them tax breaks, but also, what governments paid to clean up their messes. Okay, and that number was about $2.3 trillion. It dwarfs anything that's given to alternative energies. Between the years 1950 and 2010, 70% of the energy subsidies by the U.S. government went to oil, gas, and coal. The remainder mostly went to nuclear and hydropower. In perhaps the more telling statistic is what happened in the first 15 years of every energy source. How much were they subsidized? Or can we compare that to alternative energies? Well, if you take the first 15 years of alternative energies, and I'm not sure when that's dated from, I think this first solar panel was developed right around 1950, but it wasn't at all viable till much later. But in that first 15 years, if you compare it to the first 15 years, the oil and gas, or the fossil fuel industry, they've been subsidized for about 150 years. And back then, the governments weren't that excited about giving subsidies yet. They got about 2.5-fold greater subsidies than the alternative energies are getting now. The nuclear energy, on the other hand, has got about 8-fold higher rates of subsidies than the alternative energies are getting now. So when you hear people say that renewables can only exist with subsidies, I would say, let's level the playing field. Let's make all energies, let's not choose to subsidize oil and gas over alternative energies, the small subsidies given to alternative energies. Then we'll see what happens. And there was a really nice paper written by Nancy Fund and Ben Healy. It was called "What Would Jefferson Do? The Historical Role of Federal Subsidies in Shaping America's Energy Future." And we put a quote from them in the book. And I really like this. It says, they concluded that Jefferson would do what our country has always done: support emerging energy technologies to drive innovation, create jobs, protect our environment, enhance our national security in a time of rapid change, and to further a distinctly American way of life in which resources once thought to be endless are replaced by those that actually are. So I think they really hit it there. We have to turn to energies that won't run out, energies that'll lower our carbon footprint. And I think our local efforts here, and Solar Tompkins and Michelle and I have been lucky to take advantage of that. I think we're actually able to, I think now, once we get our second solar installation, and we'll be able to go net zero at our house because of that. And also the solutions projects that Mark Jacobson at Stanford, engineer at Stanford, worked on. And it really shows that it is possible for New York and actually every other state in the country, if there were the political will to move toward energy independence. And let me just say one other thing. At Cornell, there was at one point a thought that Cornell should be net zero by 2015. But this, in the spring semester, a group of people got together and pushed the faculty senate. The faculty senate started pushing, and at least that goal has been moved up to 2035. So there has a committee formed and figured out how to do that. And I think they may be making some progress there. I hope so. Okay. So let me just end with this, sort of the end of the book, actually. It basically says, we can do better than this. We must elect politicians who will write and enforce better regulations. More importantly, the agencies responsible for enforcement cannot be those charged with promoting mineral extraction. That's the DEC, for example. This dual mission sets up unnecessary conflicts of interest that are not in the public interest but are sadly the norm in most states. So the solution is better regulations, better enforcement of unconventional fuel extraction in the states that allow this process. But in states such as New York, which by early 2014, that's when we wrote it, still did not prevent unconventional extraction, the process should be banned until it can be proven safe through health impact assessments and definitive and animal and human health studies. More importantly, wherever we live, all of us must move beyond fossil fuels to a renewable energy future. Thank you. Thank you.
To write articles, you don't, I don't know, have the blinders on, or, I mean, what does it look like, and what do people think?
Well, first, when we
Problems-
traveled through.
How widespread are these problems?
Well, if you look at the map of Pennsylvania with where the Marcellus is, that's where our cases are. It's that swath along the Marcellus Shale. But, we were surprised at how beautiful Pennsylvania still is. It's just a beautiful state. I've been through parts of Pennsylvania. I was actually born there in Philadelphia and lived around there for a long time, that section. But I was surprised at how beautiful this state is. It's a gorgeous state. And it still is, despite this attempt to, rape it. I can use no other word than that. We saw some pads that were right on the side of the road. We saw huge processing plants. There are a number of those in Pennsylvania, these big refining. I would say, we saw a lot there, and it is in those sections for sure. But again, a lot of it's hidden. A lot of it you can't see. It's really, they tuck these things at the ends of small roads, and they put them so that the public, it's hard to see them. You almost have to fly over. And we didn't do a flyover, but we've seen a lot of video of flyovers, and then you can really see the size of these operations, and you can see how the land has been changed immensely.
But what's profitable to do generally is to drill a lot of wells close together, then they hook them up with pipelines. So really what is telling is to go to the area where that's happening. And if we go, we've been to a number of those places where there's really intensive drilling. And that's where you really have to see, that's where you see what the future might be. And that's disturbing because you might see well pads every mile, and you might, then there are pipelines being everywhere. And in some areas, there's not only pipelines for gas, but there's pipelines for water because so many people have lost their water being put in. So it's really, you can't really say, oh yeah, I'm going to drive down the interstate in Pennsylvania and say, there's nothing here, it looks fine, But yet, if you go to the pockets where there's some serious drilling going on, there are big impacts there. You wouldn't want to live there.
Then there's access roads,
Right.
which
yeah.
are pretty erosive
On
actually
a
from what I've
farm,
seen
it's a
described in
big-
Pennsylvania.
It's a big disruption on a farm, the access roads.
Well, the other thing about access roads is the last story that Michelle was talking about was interesting is because we were driving around with the person she was talking about, and we couldn't actually drive our car around there because the roads are so terrible. We have a Prius, and just forget it. I mean, we had to take her truck around. But anyway, that was good because she could take us places. But we just passed this access road, and she looked over, and she stopped the car, and said, "Look over there." And we could see this truck going up the road and spreading all this liquid on the access road. But there was another car parked there. Then we knew that they were watching anybody to make sure that they would, nobody would stop. So we left. So we kept going on, and we got out of sight, and we waited for a while, and we came back. And that whole access road was full of this liquid, and the stench was horrendous.
In fact, we didn't even have to open our doors to get a whiff. The windows were down. It was so horrible. We were going to vomit. We had to pull away. It was that bad. And the woman I was with kept perfume in her car with a hanky. So she put perfume on the hanky and put it over because that's the only thing she could do to block the smell out until she could get away. But it was...
But you're pretty sure it was one of the trucks belonging to the industry?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it was definitely a tanker
It
truck.
was going back to well pad.
Well,
There's no doubt.
yeah, it was
Oh,
definitely one of
There was
those.
a
It was
sign up
marked
there.
with residual waste or whatever they have
Oh,
on them.
okay.
And there was what they call a
Oh.
chaser truck.
Is that still
which is-
allowed by the
oh.
Pennsylvania
Well, it was on
Department
private. It was on the access road.
It was on what they call an access road to the pad. So if the person
But I
who
mean, it's
owns
still
the pad
considered waste, the
allows
groundwater.
it.
Yeah, they should. It
It
probably
wasn't on a public road.
But still, it was probably
Yeah.
illegal. The law now in Pennsylvania, as I understand it, is they are allowed to spread wastewater on the roads.
Really?
They are. They're supposed to be, getting it tested, and there are certain, levels of organics that they're supposed to be below. But the fact of the matter is, wastewater, as it comes up from a well, changes with time. And if they could test it one time, it might be different another time. So, it's not very satisfying. And
The big question we always got at all the talks we ever gave from the very beginning is food. So is my food affected? Is food coming from these areas impacted? You know, what can I trust? Is anybody testing? And really nobody is testing. Nobody is testing from these areas. Not even in the case that was quarantined. It was held for a certain period of time. There was inadequate testing done. In that case, incredibly inadequate testing because we have all of the documents on the cattle that went through necropsy. So that was, you know, this whole issue is huge. It's looming. We don't know what's getting into our food supply right now from these areas.
But that's a good way to motivate people.
So I was hoping that that would grab people's attention. What about my food? And also, what about my pets? People are always concerned about their cats and dogs. I know some people that were, you know, even more concerned about their cats and dogs than their food. It's like, you know, don't make my cat or dog sick from anything, even this. So, you know, these are all issues out there, but I was hoping, okay, this will get the public's attention. Children, your children getting sick for many reasons, as sentinels, and, you know, they're higher exposure rates for other reasons, and they can't detoxify as well as adults. So that's important. All these are huge issues that, you know, should be addressed and need to be addressed. It's really a polarizing issue. People don't want to, they don't want to think about it or talk about it. They have their view, and they do not want to even be open to hearing about the other side. And I just say, you know, if you people are telling me it's safe, why is it safe? Show me that it's safe. Well, it just is safe. We know it's safe. You know, the industry is saying it's safe. Why don't you believe that? But I don't see anything out there that's saying it's safe, that's showing me the science that it's safe. I have more questions than answers. If I have more questions than answers, fill in all these data gaps and make them show me that it is safe with public health. Because right now it's not, for many reasons, and we always talk about that.
So this has been kind of a trade-off for you in your lives? Like, obviously you spent so much time.
It definitely has. He's starting to laugh. When I first started doing this, you know, looking into these cases, he basically looked at me and said, well, you know, you're spending all your time doing this, and you know, why are you doing this? And I said, because I'm not really getting any answers here. These are cases that no but other veterinarians looking into, and I am not getting any answers. There's no clear-cut answers. Even when I call other veterinarians, they don't, you know, on these cases, they don't have answers. I'm looking at all the documentation. This is, you know, it was really interesting to me because it was a challenge. There were no answers, so I just wanted to keep digging and finding.
So that's why, I mean, that's why I said, you know, you really have to write it up. So you know, well, my background, we read it up as scientific paper, you know, and that was like the most shocking thing, you know, published all the time, but, you know, nobody gives it. Don't care.
Yes,
but
they do.
Then this paper comes out, and then like we're getting, you know, we're on the news in Australia the next day, you know, and we thought, well, maybe people are interested. So then we decided, well, maybe we should make it into a book.
We just can't let it go, even if it stops here completely, and if it's banned. We know all these other people in all these other states, and even in other countries, and we just feel like you know, we're going to keep working. And we talk to other people who are involved like us, and they say the same thing.